My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. As I've shared on Destination Unlimited before, I was a child of the 1950s and a product of the dramatic cultural changes of the 60s and 70s. Our generation had a vision of hope, where all people would share in the dream and the promise of America with equality, humanity, and compassion. Somewhere along the way, our vision blurred, and efforts lost focus. The dream turned into a nightmare, and that promise was unfulfilled. Now we see bitter political partisanship, heated clashes over immigration, the climate crisis, income inequality, sexism, racism, and violence. Our country was plagued with these problems long before COVID-19 hit. Is the United States headed for a second civil war? Is our democracy facing the threat of extinction? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Glenn Aparicio Parry, sees the current state of turmoil not as a harbinger of doom, but as a sign of our potential for renewal. He foresees a political evolution that ultimately returns America to wholeness through our true sacred promise, unity in diversity. Glenn Aparicio Parry is a writer, educational consultant, international speaker, and entrepreneur with a vision to reform thinking and education into a coherent, cohesive whole. From 1999 to 2011, he organized and participated in the groundbreaking Language of Spirit conferences, bringing together Native and Western scientists in dialogue. The founder and past president of the Seed Institute, he currently runs a think tank and regularly moderates dialogues. He's the author of the Nautilus Award-winning Original Thinking, a radical revisioning of time, humanity, and nature. He lives in northern New Mexico. His website is originalthinking.us, and he joins me this week to discuss his groundbreaking and hopeful new book, Original Politics, Making America Sacred Again. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Glenn Aparicio Parry. Welcome, Glenn.
Thank you, and thank you for the deafening applause. It's just like coming at the Democratic Convention. We're getting ready for it. Yeah, it's the Zoom world. Thank you.
The truth. Glenn, when we welcome a guest to Destination Unlimited for the first time, we ask them to share about their life path and how it led them to their callings. Please share your story with us.
Oh, my. Okay, that's a dangerous question, Victor. No. Well, of course, I'll give you the short version. But, like my native friends, I like to start by saying, I'm of Basque on my grandmother's side. I'm Basque, my father's mother. And my father's side, I'm Aragon Spanish. On my mother's side, I'm Jewish. Of course, by the Jewish tradition, I should be naming that first, but my father's side of the family was closer. So and I lived with mi abuela. I lived with my grandmother until she had to go to a nursing home when I was about 14 years old. So she was really brought the old ways in a beautiful way. I mean, I never took Pepto-Bismol. I got tummy rubs from my grandmother. So that was wonderful. Early on, I also was blessed to live next to woods. I lived in Long Island, New York, but right next to woods that I could walk through, get to the Long Island Sound. So I developed some love of the animals and birds, and we were just talking before we started, squirrels, everything there. And I think that let's just skip ahead to my path was when I went to graduate school at the California Institute of Integral Studies. It was a great blessing to take a class from Dan Moonhawk Alford, who was part Osage and Cherokee. But Moonhawk described himself as standing at the lonely intersection of quantum physics, language, Native America and Consciousness. And that's what the course was about. And that was pretty incredible. And we became lifelong friends until his untimely death at the age of 54 in 2002. But before then, Moonhawk and I cooked up the idea to bring the Language of Spirit dialogues to the organization I had founded, SEED. And Moonhawk had been one of the people invited in the initial dialogue in 1992, exactly 500 years after Columbus came to America. But this was about 1997 or 8 when we cooked this up together. I mean, he was literally smoking his pipe as he did, so it was kind of a pipe dream, and a beautiful dream, because bringing together the elders, the Native American elders and Western scientists, really it's both are scientists, because science just means to know, so it's not the property of Western culture alone. And we brought them together in dialogue, and that changed my life. It also led to more intimate interconnection with Native American ceremony and what have you. And that led to my first book, Original Thinking, a radical revisioning of time, humanity, and nature, because I wrote that book a little bit, it was inspired by those dialogues, and so I wrote it in the same voice, which was answering questions. Is it possible to have an original thought? What does it mean to be human? How is our thinking creating the world, and what is now emerging? And how can education renew, ourselves? And then Original Politics, I think, is an application of that philosophy. The first book is really a book of eco-psychology, connecting our thoughts to nature, and the second book delves into how the human society acts upon each other, but it also expands the definition of politics to include the natural world in the same way the first book does. So that's really where I am at. I share with David Bohm, who I never got to meet, but got to meet some people who knew him very well. And the dialogues we did at the Seed Institute were a hybrid of David Bohm's dialogue and Plains Indian Talking Circle. They were moderated by Leroy Little Bear. So I share with David Bohm this urgency to reform society into coherent whole, because the truth is that originally we as individuals were a whole. The very word individual means whole and undivided. But the modern individual, as Lee Nichol was talking about today in a Bohm conference I just came off of, the modern individual has become so fragmented. Our thoughts have become so fragmented, and we begin to see ourselves as a separate atomistic building block. So we've lost the connection with society and with the natural world, and that has infiltrated our politics for a very long time, really ever since Socrates. And so in effect, we have a dysfunctional politics because we focus too much on human beings. And the reality is that a human being is indivisible from the natural world. We could not be alive without breathing in the breath that the trees give out, that we and other mammals give back to them in a sacred circle. They need our carbon dioxide as much as we need their oxygen. We could not be alive without the living waters everywhere. The waters above the sky, under the earth, the river, streams, lakes, and oceans, the water in our heart that connects us, hopefully, to the heartbeat of nature. We cannot be alive without Pachamama, Mother Earth, that's supporting us, giving us this ground of being, which we ultimately return to when we die. We could not be alive without the natural world. So, the division that we've created in our mind between ourselves, between society, and between nature is a false division.
And one of the things that I happen to notice in this world, especially during the times of deforestation, is a lot of the diseases that we're confronted with these days. I can't say about COVID. I don't know that for sure. But some of the diseases were buried in the roots of these ancient forests. And with the deforestation taking place, they're open to the atmosphere.
That's very true. That's very interesting. I do believe that COVID did come about like a lot of like Ebola, like other SARS related diseases comes about because of human beings diminishing animal habitats and creating unnatural relationship with the animals. And so, a virus is part of life. I mean, germs germinate. Viruses are an integral part of the whole. And so we really ought not to be thinking about how to kill the virus, because that will never work. We have to rethink how to come back into balance so that the virus, which when it was in animal cultures was neutral, becomes neutral again. It's not necessary to kill it. It's necessary for things to be rebalanced so that the virus comes into. This is our opportunity to rethink the incoherent and way that we've been going about in our political systems.
Now, one of the things that I learned from Original Politics was the special relationship between the Founding Fathers and the indigenous peoples, and how many of the principles they adopted were native in nature.
Oh, well, that's how long do we have to the break? So, I mean, that's very, very true. I'll try to be succinct so that you bring that up. The truth is that a lot of times people say that the United States was founded on genocide, and that is something that I agree with partially. It also very much was founded on friendship, and here's why. For 150 years, the European settlers were living in close proximity with Native American cultures, and they were observing and interacting with them. Now, some of these Europeans did have a very much of a superiority complex, probably almost all of them. They harbored the idea that Native American cultures were somehow stuck in their development, or they were a reflection of where they used to be, an Adam and Eve kind of Garden of Eden fantasy. It's really just a fantasy. That projection was put upon Native people. But they also, people began to see the beauty in Native American cultures. They began to see and experience true liberty, true equality, true and true living in balance with nature. So that was happening at the same time as the Enlightenment idea that was coming in, which was considered a very exciting idea, but for Europeans, the idea of humanity figuring out nature and manipulating it to its own means. So you have this awkward collision of worldviews where the Western worldview is a lot about how we can manipulate nature. I mean, Francis Bacon says, I want to put nature on a rack and torture her to have her reveal her secrets, And then you have the native view, which is really about alliances and relationships and how you move together fluidly with nature. And so you have those two things going on concurrently. So it does create awkwardness. It does create wars. But there also were friendships. So, for instance, the Mayflower Pilgrims from 1620 for the next 54 years have a friendship with the Narragansett and with the Wampanoag. And it's through Massaoit, the person that's called Massaoit, his real name was Osaquim, but Massaoit is his title, the sachem, in their language, and that's what the colonists generally called him. So they were in peaceful relations, but they did team up. They made a military alliance against the Pequot, and in 1636 they almost vanquished them. But I find it really deliciously ironic that in the 1990s, the Pequot opened the world's largest casino only 150 miles away from New York City, and that irked Donald Trump, when his Atlantic City casinos were faltering at the time. In short, the first 50 years of American history really comes about as a hybrid of European worldview and Native American worldview, and the entire world understood it in that way. It's only after Andrew Jackson comes in and in 1830 starts the Indian Removal Act that we kick into full gear, full-scale genocide, which is really, really an awful thing. And perhaps we could talk about that after the break, if you want to.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted you to touch upon was Ben Franklin's relationship to the indigenous people.
Oh, yeah. Well, Ben Franklin is the most important player in all of this. Thank you for prompting me there. Because Ben Franklin, as you know, he was a printer of treaties. And Ben Franklin, so he was familiar with native ways for a very long time. He got a job in the Pennsylvania Assembly and actually lost his seat because he was taking the side of the Indians too often. But that was a beautiful twist of fate, because then he was appointed as Indian Commissioner, and our mother country, Britain, asked Ben Franklin, they asked some other people too, but Ben Franklin was the key person, asked him to form, approach the Iroquois Confederacy, also known as the Haudenosaunee, or people of the Longhouse, and form a military alliance with them. Now, remember, this is during the French and Indian Wars. This is and Ben Franklin is successful in doing that, but that changes the course of history, because Ben Franklin makes an abiding friendship with Chief Canastego, and Chief Canastego is the Onondaga chief who shows Ben Franklin and actually addresses all the colonists on July 4th. It's interesting, it's July 4th. July 4th, 1744, 32 years before the Declaration of Independence exactly. He tells them that they should unite, that they should be like the Iroquois Confederacy, be like us, be like the five fingers of one hand, never fall out with one another. And so the very idea to unite comes from the Iroquois, but there's so much more. The symbolism comes from the Iroquois. The eagle comes from the Iroquois. In Native American traditions, a lot of them, the eagle is sacred because your prayers are taken up to higher realms by eagles and hawks. But in the Iroquois tradition, which, the Confederacy is very old by the time that Ben Franklin gets to meet Canastego, over 500 years old. By some estimates, down to 1132 AD. Nobody knows exactly. But they formed a confederacy in the first place because they were warring amongst each other. And an outsider, a peacemaker from another tribe, or we don't know where really, probably Algonquin, but also known as peacemaker or Degawanda, he forms the alliance, and he does this first through a woman, Jiconsana, and then Hiawatha. You may have heard of these people. And they form that alliance. They partially uproot a tree. They bury their weapons underneath that tree, and they make a peace pact between themselves. On top of the tree is the eagle. The eagle holds in its talon the five arrows, which symbolize the joining of the many into one. Ben Franklin, when Chief Canastego presents to the colonists, he does that. He reenacts that same thing. He gives Ben Franklin one arrow, and then he breaks it over his knee. Then he reaches behind him, and he brings a sheaf of arrows. And in that sheaf of arrows, he symbolizes unity and diversity, coming together, strength in numbers. And Ben Franklin remembers this, makes this part of the Great Seal of the United States. But it's a lot more than that. The Articles of Confederation are actually based upon the Iroquois Great Law of Peace in large measure.
And the Articles of Confederation, for those who don't remember their American history, were?
The true founding document of the United States. The way we teach history in school now, it's like 1776, then 1789, as if nothing happened in between.
Yeah.
But actually, the Articles of Confederation are the true founding document, and they have very strong parallels to Native society. So does the Constitution, by the way. But the Articles of Confederation, everybody serves for free. Everybody is a public servant. Imagine that. There's only, it's quite amazing, actually.
My guest is Glenn Aparicio Parry. He's the author of the new book, Original Politics, Making America Sacred Again. Glenn, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
My website is originalpolitics.us or originalthinking.us, as you mentioned before. You can certainly find the book through any way that you normally purchase books, whether it's supporting your local bookseller or through Amazon. And it's also available as an audiobook. I read you the book. I love doing that. Or you can get it on Kindle, of course, as well.
And we'll be back with more of Glenn after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Free your mind with OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
My mother was always very active and independent, and she was familiar with her neighborhood. But one day, she stopped at the stop sign for much longer than usual. She wasn't even really sure where she was at.
It's important for you to talk to someone about it. I felt so much better after my son told me, Mom, we'll figure it out.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Glenn Aparicio Parry. He's the author of Original Politics, Making America Sacred Again. Glenn, your book's subtitle, Making America Sacred Again, is, of course, a play on Trump's campaign slogan, Make America Great Again. What's the difference between a great America and a sacred America?
Well, there is a world of difference. I've been saying, when I think of great, I think of the 1927 Yankees, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, power and dominance. There's power in being sacred also, but it's a different kind of power. It's not about a human egoic power or human power. It's about the power of place. It's about the power of the natural world and aligning with it. It's about invoking the whole. I mean, the word sacred in its original meaning comes from the Latin saccare, and it's about it means devote or dedicate. So it's really, if you're in devotion or dedication, you can't be just for yourself. It's about invoking the whole. It's about bringing everybody in, and that led me to my. I'm not trying to say this is right, but for me, the sacred purpose of America is unity and diversity. I think that's the sacred seed, the bindu, if you will, for your very enlightened listeners, that was planted by Native America, which was a truly egalitarian, truly inclusive society. But the seed needed to unfold. Obviously, the founding fathers took in what they wanted to take in, and to the extent that they understood the influence that they had from Native America. And your listeners should realize, too, I'm not trying to say that founding fathers didn't have influences in Europe or influences in ancient Greece. They did. But I think by far the largest influence came from living Native American cultures. And that's where, George Washington was influenced, Thomas Jefferson was influenced strongly, people like Thomas Paine were also influenced, and the phrase, the natural rights of man, emerges from this idea. And there's sort of a split in the American psyche at the beginning, too, that also had something to do with Native America, because Native Americans, they didn't need the same trappings of government that Europeans had come to take as ordinary. Judges, prisons, lawyers, those things didn't exist in Native America. And to the extent possible, some of the early founding fathers wanted to limit government to the bare minimum because they wanted people to live freely. But they also recognized that there were some ways they couldn't do it. So, in fact, back to the Articles of Confederation, the reason why it eventually was set aside and the Constitutional Convention was called, even though when they called it, they were just saying they were going to make some small adjustments to the Articles of Confederation. It wasn't true. They made major adjustments. Under the Articles of Confederation, there were 8 presidents. Yeah, people don't realize that there were 8 presidents before George Washington. They all served a 1 year than the power derived from the legislature, the same way that in an Indian council, the chief's power was derived from the council. But when they have the Constitutional Convention, they give much greater power to the executive, and that comes from Hamilton and Madison. And I couldn't find any real strong connection between Hamilton and Native America, and maybe there wasn't one. Although he lived in New York City, he was an immigrant himself. I'm sure those that have seen the Broadway show Hamilton know what I'm talking about. But Hamilton and Madison, they do think of some very clever things for the Constitution, which seem to be all from their own brilliance. But really, they got those things from Native America, too, I would contend. At least, at the very minimum, there's uncanny coincidences. For instance, in the Iroquois Great Law of Peace, there were initially 5 tribes. There's the Cayuga and the Oneida, are the younger brothers. The Seneca and the Mohawk are the older brothers. The Onondaga are the fire keepers. And as the fire keepers are kind of parallel to the executive branch, the younger brothers are similar to the House of Representatives. The older brothers are similar to the Senate. So in the Iroquois, an initiative could be started in the House of Representatives. It needed to be, with the younger brothers, and it needed to have concurrence from the older brothers, the Seneca and the Mohawk. But then it could be vetoed by the Onondaga. But if that veto, if the younger and older brothers were steadfast in their belief that this action needed to occur, the veto essentially would be overturned. So you have that. Now, something I haven't even begun to mention is the strong influence of women in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, in the political process. Women had an integral and very important role. The Women's Council was basically the Wisdom Council, and they gave the men the authority to enact the agenda on behalf of the women and for the whole tribe. But they always could come in, call a grand council, and assert their opinions. And they had the right to remove the chief if he committed malfeasance of any kind, which included actions against women. In fact, the chief would never be appointed if he wasn't a good family man, if he didn't treat women appropriately. That just would never happen. So there's a second revolution that happens in America in the 19th century. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, and Matilda Gage come in contact with these Haudenosaunee women, and they learn what true equality could be. And so when the women's movement starts up, and for your historian buffs, you know that in 1848 there's a Seneca Falls Conference, the first ever women's conference, possibly in the world, but definitely in America. They call something a Declaration of Sentiments, but it basically reads like the Second Declaration of Independence, when in the course of human events, yada, yada, yada. And what they do is they say that all men and women are created equal in that. And that's what they wanted. They only scaled back their demands when it wasn't getting across the finish line. But Native Americans helped the women's movement. They also were the source of the abolitionist movement. And the abolitionist women movement and the women's movement work hand in hand in the 19th century. And so Native Americans is an influence on the country all along, and I would contend on the ecological movement. I love Rachel Carson. She's one of my heroes, but I wouldn't trace the origin of the concept of interconnection just to Rachel's brilliant mind. It also came from Native America because that's the way they lived. Everything was interconnected. Fortunately, we have some scientists now. That's where these dialogues come back. Remember, I was talking about that. These Western scientists have indeed become a little bit, they've gone full circle. So quantum theory, relativity theory, chaos theory, and the like all recognize a radically interconnected universe. And that's the blessing we have a possibility of moving toward today.
Absolutely. And getting back to your point, though, the true founding mothers were indigenous.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Well, yeah. They had a profound effect, and I think that if we want to talk about modern times, the most important thing that's happening as a result of the 2016 election is the emergence of women in the political process. So on day one of Donald Trump's presidency, we had the Women's March, which at the time was the largest march in world history. It's not confined to the United States. It goes all over the world. And now we have Black Lives Matter movement, which has even exceeded that. But the two largest movements in world history both happened in the last 3.5 years. And there's a good reason for that.
Why do you believe that disruptions like the Trump presidency will ultimately end up as a catalyst for positive change?
That's a great question. Here's the thing. I see Donald Trump as a trickster figure, which also is, a very important aspect of Native American thinking. There's a difference between Lakota Heyoka or a Pueblo Coshade or sacred clown that is a trickster that's trying to engender higher consciousness or a higher level of integration by shocking someone out of their worldview. There is a difference. Trump is more of an unwitting trickster figure. He is I don't want to say he's an completely empty vessel, but he's become a channel for the collective shadow of the country to come forward. And this is both dangerous and an opportunity. So I tell a story in Original Politics. It's a White Mountain Apache story, and it goes like this. There's an old woman who's weaving a beautiful rug. And as she nears completion of the rug, she gets up to stir a soup that's on the fire. When she gets up, her black dog that's been sleeping in the corner awakens and pulls on a thread with its mouth and unravels the whole rug. The woman returns. She's unfazed. She looks into the rug, and where there was beauty and harmony, there's now chaos and disorder. But she picks up a thread and she reimagines an even more beautiful way to weave the rug in beauty and harmony. That I couldn't think of a more beautiful story to bring us in direct focus to where we are today. We have an opportunity to see America as it really is. Our collective shadow is coming forward. That's dangerous, shocking, and really hard to bear. You know, I mean, as I mentioned before, I'm part Jewish, you know, and when Charlottesville happened and people were in the streets saying Jews will not replace us, I was shocked. I should not have been shocked because, you know, the KKK had merged anti-Semitism with anti-black sentiment in the 1920s. So I should have known it was there, but I really was shocked. I was absolutely shocked, and I've been shocked by a lot of things that have happened in the current administration. But at the same time, we have an opportunity to see it as it really is. Here's something that I really think could be helpful to your listeners. Part of the problem with our political systems and our social systems has to do with incoherence of thought. One of my heroes is David Bohm, who wrote a lot about this. Just today, before I came on the show, Lee Nickel, who is David Bohm's editor, was speaking about this, and he presented a riveting concept that thought itself has become a trickster in modern society. And he was echoing what David Bohm said, because we have this faulty concept that our thought is just describing reality the way it is, when really our thought is a process. Our thought is a process. It's a very much of a process that wells up within us, thoughts, feelings, emotions. All of this is an undivided whole, a process. And the divisions we've created in the modern consciousness between ourself and society and between ourself and nature are illusory. So in a weird kind of way, Donald Trump, acting as a trickster figure, is also pointing out beyond the incoherence in our society and our politics, he's getting us to maybe begin to look at our own thinking process. And we could realize that we're a little more like Donald Trump than we ever realized. Now, a lot of people are going to object to hearing that, maybe even object vehemently because they've decided Donald Trump is, you know, terrible. But the truth is, you know, all politicians, especially in a representational republic, are a reflection of the people. We're the ones who voted them in. They change, the politicians change when we change. So in a weird way, Donald Trump is reflecting back to us how incoherent we have come. And he's unraveling, he's the black dog. He's unraveling all our social institutions. And as horrible as that feels in our gut, and as dangerous as it is, a true flirtation with fascism, it does give us an opportunity to see America as it really is and hopefully make substantive change now. I'm beginning to think that if Joe Biden is elected, and I didn't think this at first, that we might have a lot of substantive change. It didn't seem like that would be the case. He seemed very moderate. But there's something else that's happening that's even deeper. There's a movement that's coming forward. And it's not going to be from, you know, don't put it on Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. It's the people's consciousness that can shift and change this America. And that seed thought that was planted by Native America is still there. We can still become a sacred America, not a fascist America.
And what do we need to do to accomplish that?
Well, to become sacred is to really dissolve the illusory connection between ourself and others, to think about ourselves as an integral whole, to think of our thoughts as a system, you know, that connect us to society, to connect us to nature. When we do that and we start to act in an undivided way, we recover what the original meaning of individual was, to be undivided. We become more coherent ourselves. When we move with nature, we become happier. We become more in rhythm, in sync, what some people say, in flow. And if we manifest that in small groups and with our families, and that becomes, if that increases, then our politicians will change, because there'll be a reflection of coherence rather than incoherence.
His book is called Original Politics, Making America Sacred Again. We'll be back with more of Glenn Aparicio Parry after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
They say singing can help you remember things, so here's some tips for parents out there during these tough times.
Number 1.
Make sure your kids wash their hands for 20 seconds after they've coughed or sneezed or been outside.
2.
Virtual playdates, social and physical distancing can help save lives.
3.
Tell them they're safe and show your love and pride. Yes, we'll get through this together. Find out more at coronavirus.gov. A message from the CDC and the Ad Council.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living. A chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
Consistently attract soulmate clients, begin showing up on brand, monetizing on your calling. Welcome all spiritual coaches, leaders, healers, light workers, and practitioners to a show that turns you on in your business and amplifies your magnetism. I'm host, catalyst, and spiritual business coach Rosalind Fung, and I'm here to journey with you into the juicy and help you discover where the real gaps are. Ignite your mindset and soul with strategies and systems as each episode takes you to the sweet spot that activates your soulgasmic business by tuning in on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Mountain. Join me for your light language activation and let's magnetize and monetize.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Glenn Aparicio Parry, is the author of the new book, Original Politics, Making America Sacred Again. Are you having any concept of taking that Making America Sacred Again, perhaps putting on a hat?
That's funny you asked. I am intending to do that. And I have designed a hat. There's one in existence. It's one prototype right now. And I'm going to make two designs, actually. So the one in existence has a red front. It says Make America Sacred Again, but it also has an eagle feather. But then to the sides, the letters are in white. So it's a red front with white letters. It has a black bill. And then behind it, on the back quadrants, there's yellow and brown. So this hat represents the 5 colors of humanity. You know, now not everybody's going to think that right away. In fact, I sent this through focus group input, and people think first about the Trump hat, but then they say, oh, wait a minute, something different here. So they become transformed. That's actually what I'm aiming for. And I'm also courting controversy a little bit, quite frankly. I mean, I'm intending to send the hat to Rush Limbaugh. I'm intending to send the hat to people who would lambast it, because actually that worked for Bruce Johansen and Donald Grinde, who wrote a fantastic book in the early 1990s called Exemplar of Liberty, Native America and the Evolution of Democracy was the subtitle. That book is probably the best book ever for documenting how Native America influenced the founding of the nation. And Bruce Johansen started doing this early in the 1970s. He wrote his doctoral dissertation, and he had a lot of help from Native people because of the oral tradition that had been followed through, including people like Oren Lyons, who's still alive today and going strong at 90. So anyway, that when that book came out, it was somehow Rush Limbaugh found out about it and lambasted it on his show. And he's got, he had a lot of listeners. And because he lambasted on a show, Bill Clinton became aware of that book. And he ended up buying 535 copies of it and giving it to each member of Congress. Unfortunately, the book is out of print today. So you can pick up mine; it'll reference it.
And you're going to send a copy of that hat. You're going to send one of those hats to Rush.
The hat, yeah, I'll send the hat to Rush Limbaugh. I mean, I don't know. I don't normally court controversy. I mean, I moderate dialogues, and I put a lot of effort into actually creating a harmonious, safe environment. But it does bother me that the history of the United States, the dogma that has been created, is so impenetrable. So even when Donald Grinde and Bruce Johansen wrote this book, and before that, Bruce Johansen had written Forgotten Founders, and you have Sally Roche Wagner, who wrote Sisters in Spirit. You have Stephen Sachs, who's writing a book now that's going to come out soon called Honoring the Circle. That's going to bring a lot of these people in. It's quite a massive magnum opus. Still, it really hasn't penetrated consciousness. The most common comment people make to me when they read my book is, "I had no idea about this." So it's really important, and maybe that's an element of me being a trickster, but I do want to, awaken people to realize what truly happened. But then. And the fourth part of my book is really called Returning to Wholeness, and it's all about reconnecting with the natural world. I talk about climate change in a way that you won't see talked about very often, but I think of ourselves as we are the climate. We're the light, we're the air, we're the water, we're the earth. So the very question about, are humans causing climate change is the wrong question, I think. I mean, in my opinion, the question should be, what can climate change teach us?
Absolutely.
And it can teach us how we're a totally radically interrelated whole. And if we learn that, that's the most important lesson. It's not about, ultimately restricting carbon emissions or any of those kind of piecemeal gestures will only have a partial effect. We have to shift the way we think about us and the human being in the world. We have to reinvent our definition of what it means to be human.
How can we teach future generations to learn from nature and become stewards of the planet?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure I have the complete answer, but I think it has to, people have to re-indigenize themselves. I mean, we're in this COVID era where we have, it's really hard to see our human friends, I mean, we do it in very, might have a couple people over in our backyard or something at a time. We're shunning large gatherings. We don't have parties. Humans are social creatures like ants, we need to touch antenna, so this is a difficult time for us in that way. But I would suggest that people go out in nature. If you have access to the woods, go into the woods where there's more of the natural world, more animals and plants. But if you have your backyard, do that. If you have a city park, do that. To the extent possible, make some more than human friends. That will be deeply healing, because I contend, and I lead to this in my book, that love of nature is going to lead to a love of each other. It's really by immersing ourselves in the biodiversity of the natural world that we can learn how everything interrelates. Nature is ultimately more of a orchestra, a polysymphonic orchestra, than cause and effect.
What will it take to reconfigure our politics and society as soon as the Trump presidency is in the rearview mirror?
Okay, I want to make something really clear. I'm not saying that we are going to become a sacred America immediately. I'm not saying that's going to happen immediately after the Trump presidency. That's the goal. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I mean, that's the shift of consciousness. It could be that it is rapid when we get to that point. It's like the 100th monkey theory. You know, I mean, it's when the shift in consciousness happens, it happens. And then things shift really rapidly. And it doesn't matter who the politicians are then, because they're going to reflect the will of the people. When the Trump presidency is over, assuming, and it's now two different things, between voting him out is one thing, removing him from office is another thing. What's going on right now with the dismantling of the U.S. Postal Service is beyond alarming. So, you know, I mean, there's no certainty that this is going to be a fair election. In fact, it's pretty certain it's not going to be. So, but assuming that the will of the people is such that it overcomes any interference and Trump is voted out and removed, those two separate things, then we are going to have to do a deep reflection about how that Donald Trump is not the cause of all these things. He's a symptom more than a cause. We're going to have to see how the political society got corrupted, you know, in the last 25 years. I mean, we began, I don't want to blame it all on Newt Gingrich, but he was one of the people who when the C-SPAN cameras were in there, used to make bombastic speeches, which were later aired on Fox News. And Ronald Reagan was the one who scuttled the Fairness Act. So we used to have a more coherent society where, at least on the broadcast networks, you had to follow a liberal show with a conservative show, because liberals and conservatives, that's not the problem. And human urge to progress needs to be balanced by an urge to conserve. But conservatives in America need to become more like the conservatives are in Europe today. They need to have an ecological consciousness, which they did have as recently as the 1970s. People may have forgotten, but it was under the Nixon administration that the Environmental Protection Agency was formed. It's, you know, and also the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts were passed. Now, Nixon, I think, vetoed the Clean Water Act, but even that shows you the whole Congress overturned that veto because everybody understood we needed clean air and clean water. So we need to get back to that.
And liberals and conservatives knew how to compromise.
Yeah, they knew that the system has been corrupted by big money, and I like John Roberts generally, but he was on the, I would say, the wrong side of history when it came to Citizens United and also the Voting Rights Act. I have more compassion for his mistake with the Voting Rights Act because he thought that the country had changed, because that was some of the protections were rolled back at the same time that Barack Obama was our first African American president. So he wasn't the only one. There was this false idea, a very hopeful but false idea, that we had gone post-racial society. And it sounds pretty silly now, but a lot of people were believing that then. But what was really happening is that when Barack Obama was elected, we'd never satisfied the shadow from the Civil War. And we'd never satisfied the shadow from our upbringings. That was created when the founding fathers left out women and people of color from the equation. So truly, Barack Obama is not the beginning of the emergence. Barack Obama is the beginning of the emergence of the American shadow. Donald Trump just exacerbated it even more so and encouraged it. He spoke in a way that encouraged racism and sexism to come out of the shadows. But it started under Obama because there were white racists who were freaked out to have an African American president, and that the Tea Party movement, which ostensibly was about fiscal conservatism, but it really got infiltrated by racist elements. So there's a lot to consider here. Is what I'm trying to say is the good news is white America has shifted in the last, really 3 months. Now, how permanent that's going to be, I don't know, but there is an awakening, and people are beginning to see America as it truly is. I think there is an opportunity to make some real deep substantive change, but it's not going to be everything I'm talking about. People are not going to completely align their consciousness with society and nature, but that's coming. That's coming. I don't know when, but we can only pray and hold that thought, because it is coming.
And I join you in that hope and prayer. My guest, Glenn Aparicio Parry, his new book, Original Politics, Making America Sacred Again. Glenn, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and this amazing work.
Thank you. Go to my website, www.originalpolitics.us or www.originalthinking.us. You can also go to Amazon, and you can order the audiobook on Audible, and it's on Kindle as well.
Glenn, thank you so much, and thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.